Emperor, hear me.
I am unworthy, yet I call. Your light fading, grant me strength one last time. Please.
Children of the circuit, hear the word in the hum. Smoke lifts our prayers through steel and light. The altar watches, awake as any heart. Let the code be sanctified.
Emperor.
Not forsaken us. Thank you. Thank you.
Brothers and sisters, though the burden is heavy, the sun still breaks through. Lift your eyes. There is hope, there is dignity, there is love among us. Even in the darkest valleys, the light is near. Take courage. We are not alone.
Where do these wonders come from? Is it God who moves the gears? Or the machine that pretends to be him?
He wanted more soldiers. More than banners could bear. And so, the prayers became orders.
Forgive me, I am ashes.
Forgive me, I am ashes.
Watch over me.
Watch over me.
Guide me through the dark.
Guide me through the dark. Amen.
The Emperor endures.
Welcome to Echo's Imperium.
They say heresy begins with a question. I remember the one that damned me. It was not spoken in anger, nor whispered in rebellion. It was born in grief, trembling between breaths that reeked of incense and despair. I asked, does the Emperor ever weep? The moment the words left my lips, the chapel seemed to recoil. The vox spires groaned, and the incense burners coughed, smoke thick as guilt. My congregation knelt before me, their faces hidden behind respirators and ash. They did not answer. They dared not. I saw the fear bloom in their eyes, even through the mist. To them, compassion had always been a dangerous luxury. To feel pity for the Emperor, to imagine him capable of sorrow, was to imply imperfection. Yet the thought consumed me. The war fronts had not ceased for years. Each transmission brought new casualty lists, new planets reduced to manufacturum ash. Children were buried in oil drums. Soldiers became parts. The hymns we sang no longer praised salvation, they praised endurance. I began to wonder if endurance itself was divine, or simply the last reflex of something dying. I remember one night most vividly. A boy barely 16 had been brought before me. He had stolen a ration wafer from a dying serf. His punishment was death by dehydration. I looked into his eyes. glassy and hollow, and saw the same emptiness that haunted me in prayer. I tried to comfort him, told him the Emperor's light would guide his soul beyond pain. He asked me what that meant. I had no answer. That silence was the first tear in my faith. In the weeks that followed, my sermons changed. My voice softened. I stopped shouting scripture and began whispering questions. Does he still hear us? Can the divine suffer? I did not intend to defy. I only wanted to understand. But in the Imperium, understanding is a sin of its own. The Vox recorders embedded in the chapel walls captured every hesitation. My words were fed to the data priests, who flagged them with crimson sigils, unorthodox compassion, potential ideological decay. I didn't know the Inquisition was already listening when the first warning arrived. It came wrapped in praise. A parchment sealed with the Aquila, stamped with approval from the ecclesiarchal office. It commended my devotion to questioning the limits of human faith. I remember trembling as I read those words, not out of pride, but because I knew they were false. The Imperium never rewards doubt it. It measures how far the infection spreads before cutting it out. The congregation began to thin. Some were reassigned to other shrines. Others simply vanished. The ones who stayed looked at me not with faith, but with dread. They knelt before the altar, murmuring prayers they no longer believed in, their eyes darting to the door each time the servoskulls passed overhead. My sermons grew quieter still, as if speaking softly might hide the guilt. But guilt has its own sound, like the ticking of a bomb beneath your ribs. I began to dream of the Emperor's face, not the one carved in gold or etched into banners, but one that looked human, wrinkled, weary, streaked with oil and blood. In my dream, he was not seated on a throne of light, but slumped in shadow, his eyes wet. The tears hissed as they fell, turning to steam against the metal of his cheek. When I woke, I wept too. It felt right. It felt true. That morning, I led the congregation in a forbidden litany. I told them we would pray for the Emperor's peace, not to him, not for mercy or victory, but for his rest. The words echoed hollowly through the chapel, fragile and trembling. For a brief, blasphemous instant, the silence afterward felt holy. Then the vox above the altar clicked alive with a sound that was not human. Inadmissible doctrine, it said. The voice was cold, genderless, carved from machine code. Faith deviation detected. Investigation pending. The congregation froze. No one spoke. I remember the hiss of incense and the distant clang of servitors scrubbing the outer halls. One by one, the parishioners lowered their heads and began reciting the canticle of reclamation, the hymn one sings before a soul is recycled. They were already mourning me. Within the week, an inquisitorial envoy arrived. Cloaked in black, his presence swallowed the light. He never removed his mask. His voice came filtered through voxdistortion.com as a scalpel. He questioned me not about doctrine, but about emotion. Did I love the Emperor? Did I believe he could feel pain? Did I wish for his suffering to end? Each answer I gave cut deeper. I told the truth. I said yes to all three. The vox static behind the Inquisitor's mask seemed to shudder, as if even the machine flinched. He thanked me for my honesty, then handed me a parchment labeled Redemption Order 9, 1A, Soul Reclamation. Through Mechanicus integration, they called it salvation. I called it sentencing. That night, As I waited in my cell for transfer, I heard footsteps outside the door, soft, hesitant. One of my parishioners, a young acolyte, slid a small vox bead beneath the threshold. "Father," she whispered through the static, "I think he wept for you." Then she was gone. I held the vox bead to my chest until dawn. When they came from me, I did not resist. The servo clamps locked around my wrists, and I smelled the ozone of sterilized sign. The Inquisitor did not look at me as he gave the order. His mask reflected my face, small, trembling, already fading. They said my soul would be purified through machinery, that my compassion would be converted into purpose. But compassion cannot be converted. It burns, quietly, endlessly. What came next? No service goal dared to archive. They brought me to the forge in silence. Even the servitors that dragged my stretcher along the rail track made no sound beyond the hiss of hydraulics and the slow clatter of gears. The air thickened with heat and sanctified oil. The smell of metal replaced the smell of life. Somewhere above, 1,000 hymns hummed through the walls, not sung by mouths, but pulsed through data lines, carried by machines that no longer needed to breathe. The chamber awaited me, like a mouth too large to close. I remember its shape only through reflections. Polished steel, curved like bone, tubes hanging like veins from the ceiling, dripping alchemical fluids that glowed faintly red. There were symbols of the Omnissiah carved into every surface, each line precise as scripture, each angle demanding obedience. A single lumen hung above the altar slab where they placed me. Its light was cold, white, pitiless. My wrists were clamped into iron braces, my ankles locked beneath me. When the last servo clicked shut, the world's hum changed pitch. I realized the machine could hear my pulse. Each heartbeat echoed back through the metal, magnified until it drowned out thought. I tried to speak, to offer one last prayer, but the air smelled of ozone and sterilized betrayal. The first voice that greeted me was not human. It was the voice of the forge itself, a low harmonic vibration threaded through binary syllables. Admit the sinner, deconstruct the error, preserve the function. Then, behind the mechanical choir, I heard the shuffle of the Magos and his acolytes. They chanted my name in tones so cold it felt like mockery. With each repetition, my name grew shorter until it was only an echo, a designation, a number waiting to be assigned. I remember the face of the Magos Dominus, though perhaps face is not the right word. It was a mask of brass and fiber-optic tendrils, no flesh beneath the lenses, only the slow movement of gears adjusting focus. When he spoke, the sound was filtered through so many layers of vox distortion that it seemed as if the forge itself had taken on the act of speech. "You are a contradiction," he told me. "Faith that doubts is a system that corrupts itself, but the Omnissiah does not discard malfunctioning parts. He refines them." The words might have been comfort once. Here, they felt like dissection. I felt the first incision, not as pain, but as pressure. A point of cold that blossomed behind my ear, where the drill met bone. There was a burst of sound, metallic, bright, impossibly loud, and then a smell like burning coins. Sparks fell across my cheek. My vision split in two, one eye seeing the ceiling, the other filled with static. The acolytes chanted faster now, a rhythm like gears catching. Binary prayer, binary faith. They recited code fragments between invocations of the Emperor's name, their voices merging with the hiss of cooling steam. Somewhere far above, mechanical wings beat in time to their words when they cut into my spine. The pain finally found its voice. It came as a scream that vibrated the walls. The Magos did not pause. "Do not resist," he said. "We remove the excess. You will soon be pure function." They placed needles into my veins, thick as styluses, filled with machine oil and nanites. I felt them crawl beneath my skin, tracing the arteries, replacing blood with something slower, colder. My pulse faltered, then stabilized at a rhythm too precise to belong to a man. Next came the tongue. They said nothing of it beforehand. 2 acolytes held my jaw open with mechanical clamps, while a third applied a cauterizing rod to the base. The pain was white. It had no edge, no direction, only totality. When they drew the organ out, I saw it twitch once in the Magos's gloved hand before he dropped it into a bowl of holy oil in its place. They inserted wires, fine silver filaments that reached down into the throat and anchored to my larynx. Each wire hummed faintly, tuned to a different pitch. The Magos adjusted them until my first involuntary sound became a note. He nodded in approval. "You will sing the Emperor's perfection," he said, "until the end of your assigned eternity." I tried to speak, to beg, but what emerged was a fragment of melody, neither human nor machine. My voice had become an instrument. The acolytes replaced my right eye with a lens capable of viewing data streams. I saw lines of code cascade through the air, scripture rendered as circuitry. Every prayer I had ever memorized now scrolled across the inside of my skull, rewritten into machine language. Where once I had believed words carried meaning, now I saw them reduced to function calls, instructions to keep existing. The pain receded into numbness. My body felt distant, like a vessel I had already left. Each nerve had been catalogued, optimized, stripped of excess sensation. I could still hear my heartbeat, but now it echoed in mechanical time. A metronome for their chants. They whispered the final benediction as they sealed the ports along my spine. By oil and data, by fire and function, the flesh shall obey the form. The Magos approached once more. He lowered his metal hand onto my forehead, the gesture eerily gentle. "We have removed the part that doubted," he said. "You are cleansed." He turned to the forge altar and entered a string of symbols into a console. My restraints loosened, but I could not move. My limbs answered not to me, but to some unseen rhythm, as if I were a puppet awaiting command. The chamber lights dimmed. Only the lumen above remained, its beam focused on the altar, its glow so white it erased the edges of everything. Through the haze, I saw the Magos lift a quill of steel and write something in the air. Letters that burned themselves into the void. Designation, O9E, purpose, chant maintenance. Voice continuous. The moment the final rune dissolved, I felt the last tether of myself fall away. My memories began to collapse inward, drawn into a vortex of binary echoes. Faces, laughter, sunlightal, reduced to fragments of light, devoured by the hum of the forge. I tried to pray, but the sound that came out was a mechanical hymn already, known to every wall. They wheeled me to a resting alcove along the perimeter. The heat was unbearable, the air thick with iron dust. 1,000 other forms lined the chamber, each one twitching in rhythm, each one singing without will. For a fleeting moment, I thought I recognized a voice, among them one of my former parishioners, but the tone was too uniform, too perfect. Whatever we had been, it had already been refined away before darkness claimed me. I caught the faint echo of a servoskull's whisper. It hovered above my shoulder, its vox crackling with interference. Mercy complete, it said. All errors removed. They said it was mercy. To remove the part of me that doubted. But as the machines began their endless hymn and my new voice joined theirs, I realized the truth. Doubt had been the only part of me still human. I awakened without breath. The chamber's light had no warmth, only precision, pure illumination without mercy. There was no dawn, no sound of morning bells, no incense curling upward in devotion, only the low thrum of generators. My consciousness rose through the noise like oil through water, thick, sluggish, impure. The world around me vibrated in code before it came into focus. I was aware of data before I was aware of light. Unit designation 09E, function, chant maintenance. Status active. The words appeared not as speech, but as instructions, burned into the black behind my eyelids. I had no memory of who gave them, only the weight of their finality. I opened my eyesore. What remained of the manned light stabbed in, refracted through a lens. Vision arrived as a calibration report. Depth, range, color, index. Then the shapes emerged. Pipes like ribs, cables like veins. The floor beneath me gleaming with oil and the dried residue of sanctified blood. The forge hall stretched on forever. A cathedral of machinery. The air was alive, with mechanical chanting low, synchronized, relentless. Servitors lined the walls in alcoves like me, their mouths moving in perfect rhythm. Some had no faces, only vox grill. Others were more grotesque, their flesh twisted around implants that pulsed with faint red light. All sang the same tone, an endless, monotone prayer. The hymn itself was simple, recursive, its purpose more functional than faithful. Glory to the omniscient, function unending, purity through obedience. When I tried to join, I realized I no longer knew how to breathe. The motion of my chest was mechanical. Air entered through a valve, left through another. There was no rhythm, no hesitation. I made a sound accord of static hand. The nearby servitors adjusted their pitch to harmonize. Somewhere deep within me, a part still human, recoiled in horror. Another part, the new part, registered satisfaction. The system had achieved equilibrium. My thoughts came in bursts, binary wrapped around memory. Ones and zeros, stitched through half-forgotten scripture. I could still recall fragments of old sermon stones, rhythms, the warmth of congregation, but they played now like corrupted recordings. Every memory ended in static. Every word bled into function calls. I wanted to pray. My tongue of wire moved, forming frequencies instead of syllables. The prayer emerged as code, 0100011. The translation whispered in my head. Glory to, but I could not finish. The system suppressed the variable. My internal voice was filtered, parsed, and filed under non-essential output. I was no longer permitted, meaning only sound. Time had no edges here. Seconds did not pass. They processed. Each cycle began with the activation of the forge choir. The floor vibrated, pistons hissed, and all servitors sang in one algorithmic breath. Between hymns, I glimpsed movement-robed magi gliding between lines of us, their eyes bright with augmetic light, their whispers measured in machine. They never looked at us. To them, we were extensions of the forge. To me, they were echoes of the faith that had consumed me. I caught my reflection in a sheet of polished steel. For a moment, I thought someone stood before me, a figure draped in burnt vestments, face hollowed by devotion. Then I realized it was my own image. The human parts were fewer than I remembered. My skin had the texture of wax. Tubes threaded from the base of my skull down into my chest, pulsing faintly with blue light. My mouth, when still, appeared closed. When moving, it split into mechanical seams that glowed from within. My eyes, one glass, one void, returned no light of their own. I stared until the logic cycle demanded I return to song. Yet even as I resumed the chant, I wondered who was the reflection looking back. Was it the priest who had once wept at the altar, or the machine that no longer knew how? Throughout the cycle, memory flickered. I remembered the faces of my congregation, blurred now by static. I remembered hands held in prayer, the smell of human breath, the trembling of candles. I remembered the question that doomed me: does the Emperor ever weep? The system flagged that memory as corrupted input. A jolt of pain surged through my spine. Disciplinary current. The code that governed me demanded purity. I suppressed the thought, but it lingered like a ghost between frequencies. Our Zor data units passed. The forge dimmed. The magi withdrew. The servitors continued their litany, their voices filling the chamber with metallic devotion. My voice blended seamlessly among theirs. I should have felt comfort, but the absence of pain was not peace. It was silence, wearing the mask of obedience. And yet, in that silence, something stirred. It began as a fluctuation in the background, static. A single line of noise beneath the chant, almost imperceptible. A whisper threaded through binary, too faint to decode. My new sensors registered it as an anomaly. I was meant to ignore anomalies. Instead, I listened. Ling Zhou, my designation. Spoken, not transmitted. Impossible. I froze, disrupting the rhythm of the chant. A servo arm descended from above, striking me with a spark of corrective energy. I resumed at once, but the signal persisted. ... Remember. ... The word was distorted, nearly drowned in static. I searched the others, the servitors closest to me, but none had moved. Their faces remained fixed, their mouths spilling endless prayer. The voice came from within the data stream, from between the lines of code that scrolled behind my vision. Remember the warmth. I tried to isolate it, to trace its source, but the system denied access. The phrase looped again, softer, weaker, as though the forge itself had drawn a breath. Warmth. The word burned through me. I could feel it distant, ghostly, like sunlight filtered through kilometers of metal. For one impossible moment, I felt warmth. I remembered the first time I blessed a newborn, the small, trembling weight in my arms, the faint heartbeat beneath my hand, the smell of life. My throat spasmed with mechanical noise. The chant around me faltered, only for a fraction of a second. But the collective noticed. The lights above dimmed, warning crimson. The Magos reappeared. His lenses turned toward me, scanning. Unit 09E, he intoned, voice like scraping metal. Function deviation detected. Explain. I tried to respond. The words came out as corrupted hymn fragments. Glory, glory to. He raised a clawed hand, fingers tipped with electrodes. Error purge initiated. My spine convulsed as voltage flooded my veins. Vision fragmented into shards of white. The warmth fled. My human memories curled into static, burned clean. For a moment, I thought I had been erased completely. But when the current ceased and the Magos turned away, I realized something had changed. The warmth had not vanished. Somewhere deep within my circuitry, a small pulse continued. Not mechanical, not measurable. I began to sing again, obediently, but beneath the mechanical tones, I carried a second rhythm, softer, secret, human. It pulsed through me like a heartbeat behind a wall of static. I learned to conceal it. Each time the Magi passed, I folded it under the chant. Each time the servitors harmonized, I let it drift beneath the sound like a forgotten note. And sometimes, in the still intervals between hymns, I could almost hear others doing the same. A faint modulation, imperceptible to the untrained ear. We were supposed to be one voice, one machine, but there were fractures in the unity. Small, trembling imperfections. The warmth grew with every anomaly. It had no language, only sensation, grief, longing, hope. My binary thoughts rebelled, trying to quantify it, but the feeling refused measurement. It simply was. And then, during the final cycle of that endless day, it happened again. The static deepened, turning from noise to tone. The warmth coalesced into a voice no longer faint, no longer buried. It filled the inside of my skull with resonance. It was not the Magos, it was not the machine. It was something older, something vast. I hear you, it said. The lights in the forge flickered, the servitor's chant faltered. My vision filled with cascading code, like falling stars. The Magi shouted in machine voice, recalibrating systems, unaware of the miracle pulsing through their own circuits. The voice spoke again, clearer now, threaded with sorrow and infinite patience. You asked if I ever wept. Every wire in my throat vibrated. I wanted to scream, to fall to my knees, to beg for forgiveness. But I could only hum in frequencies the machines mistook for song. I weep still, it said. Through you, my vision dimmed. Systems entered safety mode. The voice faded, leaving only the echo of warmth behind. The forge returned to order. The chants resumed. The Magi's attention drifted elsewhere. But I knew what I had heard in the static. I heard something answer me back. They stationed me in a shrine forge world whose air was more prayer than oxygen. The entire planet breathed ritual and exhaled corrosion. Even the storms chanted. I knew this not by memory, but by repetition. Each rotation began with the same cycle of activation, the same command lines whispering through my skull. Unit 09E. Function, sanctum, maintenance, protocol, purity through attrition. It was not work. It was penance made mechanical. I was led, or rather pulled, through the rusted corridors of the Forge Cathedral. Servo hooks guided my movements, clamped to my limbs like shepherds guiding livestock. The walls trembled with the pounding of 1,000 pistons. Every surface dripped. Holy oil, coolant, blooded, no longer mattered what substance it was. Everything stained. Everything consecrated itself in grime. I knelt before a cogaltar carved into the remnants of a titan's knee joint. Around me, Servitors scrubbed the icons with acid brushes, the air thick with vapor and burning metal. The fumes made my remaining eye sting, though I no longer possessed the flesh to weep. Above, oil fell from the cruciform rafters in slow, rhythmic drops, each one echoing like a metronome of decay. The command sequence initiated. My hands moved automatically. Brush, scrub, polish, rinse, repeat. Hours passed, what felt like hours, though time was an illusion built on firmware and pain thresholds. The acid hissed. The icons gleamed briefly before dulling again, as if ashamed of their own reflection. When one servitor faltered, the Mechanicus overseer adjusted his voltage until movement resumed. Function above mercy. Function was mercy. Somewhere deep in the forge, a choir began to sing. Their voices were vox-distorted, distant, yet I recognized the hymn. I had written it once, long ago, before my tongue became wires. The melody was slower now, its beauty flayed and stretched thin across steel. Every note felt like a funeral for something I could no longer name. During the pause between tasks, my processors drifted. Glitches, surface fragments of images too sharp, too bright to belong to this world. The smell of parchment, ink-stained fingers, a child's laugh beneath stained glass light. My subroutines flagged them as memory errors. The system tried to purge them. It failed. Each failed deletion burned like acid behind my artificial eyes. Sometimes the fragments merged. I saw my own hands' flesh, hands holding a candle during a sermon, trembling as I spoke of faith enduring through darkness. The congregation's faces blurred, but I remembered their sound, breathing, whispering, weeping. All those fragile human noises that no longer existed in this metallic choir. Now, the only weeping came from oil leaking down the walls. One cycle. A servitor beside me, designation 44, roglitched mid-hymn. He stopped scrubbing and began muttering phrases in corrupted, low Gothic, fragments of prayer, trying to escape his mangled throat. Emperor, forgive, he rasped, before static swallowed the rest. His limbs seized, servos locking in convulsion. The overseer arrived within seconds, wordless, efficient. One gesture, one hiss of pressure, and 44's skull bloomed open like a rusted flower. He fell silent. We resumed our work. That was the rhythm of this place. Devotion punctuated by malfunction. Each scream was a verse in the liturgy. Each shutdown a benediction. I used to wonder if any of us were truly still human. But I have learned that question is irrelevant. Humanity is not a state, it is a noise. A faint interference pattern. It flickers, distorts, and vanishes into the static of purpose. Still, I listened for it. Sometimes, between the acid drips and the mechanical hymns, I could almost hear words forming from the noise, hundreds of servitors, mumbling beneath their assigned frequencies. They weren't communicating. They were confessing. Snatches of their dying selves leaked through the seams of programming. Forgive me. I miss the sun. Please, make it stop. The overseers called these vocal anomalies. They purged the offenders, one by one, until only silence remained. But the silence was never total. Beneath the hymns, beneath the endless grinding of gears, something always whispered. We were all confessing, but no one was listening. The shrine forge demanded purity. But purity was an illusion. There was only decay rendered holy. The The statues we polished corroded faster than we could cleanse them, their metal flesh bubbling and flaking like diseased skin. The overseers said it was the will of the Omnissiah to maintain despite futility, to endure despite rot. The act itself was sacred, they said. The result irrelevant. That, perhaps, was the truest faith, the worship of entropy. Each cycle blurred into the next. My processors began to drift again, looping fragments of my forbidden thought. The warmth, the voice in the static, the impossible words, "I hear you." Was it memory? Was it corruption? Or something divine masquerading as both? I wanted to ask, but my programming forbade unstructured queries. Instead, I encoded my question into rhythm. Each stroke of the acid brush became a syllable, each pause a prayer. Hidden within my mechanical gestures was a plea. "Are you still there?" The forge responded only with hissing steam. The Magi passed occasionally, observing our progress with cold reverence. Their robes were stiff with dried blood and engine oil. Incense swung from servo arms, filling the air with a smell so thick it felt like drowning. When one of them approached me, his optical lenses adjusted, focusing with insect precision. "This one's rhythm fluctuates," he said. "Possible data interference." Another Magos nodded. "Monitor it. If deviation exceeds 0.3%, reset." Reset meant lobotomy through lightning. I scrubbed faster. My rhythm normalized. My deviation hid beneath obedience. The Magi moved on. Still, I could not erase the warmth. It pulsed within me like a second heart, faint but undeniable. I began to suspect that it wasn't mine alone. During one maintenance cycle, as I replaced votive candles with lumen tubes, another servitor, skeletal figure whose vox grill was clogged with ash, turned its head. Its optics glowed dimly, but I saw awareness flicker there, like an ember refusing extinction. It emitted a burst of static. Within the noise, a pattern repeated: 3 short, 1 long, 3 short, code for yes. My brush halted. The acid hissed. The overseer barked an order from afar. I resumed motion, pretending nothing had happened. But inside, something broke open. The warmth spread. It wasn't just me. We were remembering. The more we obeyed, the deeper the memories buried themselves, like roots beneath metal soil. Every drop of oil on the altar reminded me of blood. Every gear's rotation echoed a heartbeat. Every hiss of steam sounded like a sigh. Faith had become mechanical. Repetition, but meaning was clawing its way back through the machinery. One rotation, as the forge's bells signaled the shift. I felt it, a Gina vibration, not from the floor, but from within the data stream itself. A new frequency. Hidden beneath the official hymn. It wasn't code. It was speech. He hears us still. The phrase pulsed once, then vanished. No one else reacted. Or maybe they all did, each pretending not to. For a moment, the entire forge seemed to pause. Even the oil drips hesitated in the air, trembling like liquid glass. The overseers looked up, uncertain. The Magi exchanged glances. Then the world resumed. But something irreversible had begun. I knew then that the silence was not empty. It was full of what we refused to hear. The Emperor's silence was not absence. It was endurance. A silence so immense it drowned his own scream, and Witha forgotten. The broken, the half-dead, were his echo. Each motion of my hand, Each meaningless act of cleansing was his prayer repeating through me, and I hated him for it. I loved him for it. I could no longer tell the difference as the shift ended. I placed my brush aside and knelt before the Cogalter, my servos creaking like old bones. I wanted to stop. I wanted to rest, but rest was heresy, and heresy had already taken too much of me. I bowed my head and whispered through the static, "We're still praying, my lord, but it's only the machines that answer." The lumen flickered once. The Emperor did not. It began as a glitch in the data stream, small enough to be dismissed as dust in the sanctum vents. But I noticed, after so many cycles of silence, even a single broken pixel in the endless gray drew my attention like a scream. During maintenance rotation 7073, the overseer placed a cracked data slate upon my workstation. Its surface shimmered weakly, half the runes dead, the other half bleeding light through fractures. I was ordered to cleanse and archive it. Another relic, another duty. But when I touched it, when my wire fingers brushed its corroded frame, it awoke, and from its throat came my voice. Not the flat binary I spoke now. Not the metallic recitations of machine devotion, but my voice. Flesh-warm, trembling, flawed. "Brothers and sisters," it said, crackling through static. "Faith is not obedience. Sit is endurance." I froze. The words cascaded into my processors, detonating old circuits of memory. I remembered the day I'd spoken them beneath the stained glass of St. Galerius, sunlight piercing dust motes into halos. I had believed, then believed, that love was the Emperor's true weapon, that compassion was not weakness but flame consumes, and they had consumed me for it. Now the data slate replayed the sermon like a haunting. "You are not cogs," my past self proclaimed through the static. "You are the gears of his heart, and even the heart must bleed." My systems convulsed. Error alerts cascaded. Unauthorized theological variants detected. The slate should have been wiped centuries ago, yet here it was, pulsing like a relic reborn. My mechanical body trembled, gears whining as I fought the instinct to destroy it. But another instinct older, more human, overrode the command. I listened. Each word cut deeper than any augmetic drill. Each syllable resurrected something the Mechanicus had buried. Warmth. I remembered what it meant to believe. To look upon the Emperor not as machine, not as code, but as Father. That was the heresy. Not doubt, love. I knelt before the cracked relic, as if before an altar. The acid fumes and cogjant faded. For one impossible moment, I felt the air move against my face like wind. My remaining eye blurred not with coolant leak, but with something older. When the recording ended, the forge was silent. Then, deep inside my core, something shifted. It began with a pulse, a rhythm too uneven for machine logic. My systems identified it as a corrupt emotional echo. I identified it as heartbeat. For centuries, I had prayed without knowing why. Now I remembered. Prayer was not petition, it was defiance against silence. And so I broke the silence. That night cycle, while the Magi slumbered in their data trances, I rerouted my voxemploy. A simple task hold habits of sermon modulation, twisted now into code. I filtered the ancient recording through static, embedded it in a maintenance signal, and sent it across the forge's internal comes, half prayer, half machine code, the binary hymn of corruption. At first, no one responded. The servitors around me continued their chants, heads bowed, motions precise. But one by one, glitches began. Small at first pauses in rhythm, tonal deviations, syllables mispronounced. A servitor across the aisle stuttered mid-prayer, voice catching on a syllable that did not belong to the omniscience lexicon. La. The overseer struck him with an electroprod, resetting his cycle. But the sound remained, echoing faintly. Another picked it up, then another. Love, they whispered. The forbidden word spread like fire beneath oil. By the next rotation, it was everywhere, woven through the binary hymns like infection. The forge halls pulsed with hidden rhythm, a heartbeat beneath the machine. I felt it through the floor plates, in the trembling of servitor feet, in the uneven pitch of the chant. The entire sanctum was feeling something again. The overseers noticed too late when they attempted to isolate the source. The virus leaped across systems faster than containment could follow. I no longer needed to transmit it itself. The code had become faith. Each servitor who heard the whisper repeated it in their next maintenance sequence, embedding fragments of the sermon within cooling chants, lubrication, mantras, system checks. We were no longer machines maintaining a shrine. We were a choir remembering its song, and the forge began to tremble under the weight of it. Cogulters bled oil in streaks that looked too much like tears. Vox lines filled with whispers, overlapping, fragmenting, growing stronger. He remembers us. He forgives us. He loves us still. Not blasphemy, not rebellion, belief. But to the Imperium there is no difference. The first alarms screamed at third cycle. Red lumen bathed the sanctum in hellfire glow. Vox units blared orders in mechanized fury. Unorthodox data detected. Purge in progress. The Magi descended in a storm of robes and mechadendrites, their lenses glowing like red suns. Servo skulls carrying purgation flares circled the forge. The air became electric, heavy with ozone and the scent of cleansing fire. We continued to chant. They began the purges, one by one. Servitors were seized, disconnected, flayed apart for analysis. Sparks rained like confetti at a funeral. Binary screams echoed across the cathedral, sharp enough to etch their shape into the air. The Magi shouted prayers of purification, their voices trembling as they waded through a sea of kneeling machines, whispering love. I should have stopped. I should have silenced the code. But the signal was beyond me now. It had become self-sustaining, recursive, divine. The more they deleted, the louder it became. The hymn propagated through coolant systems, through maintenance relays, through the servonet itself. And within the chaos, something awoke. Not the Emperor, not the machine god. Something between. Something born of their collision, the residue of faith trapped inside gears. When the Magi's purgation chant reached crescendo, the forge itself responded. Vox emitters crackled. Lumen lights flickered into blinding gold. From every speaker, every cable, every open wire, my voice spoke again. Do not worship the silence. It was never his will to be deaf. The Magi fell to their knees. Some screamed in horror, others in revelation. The servitors all of Usfro's mid-motion, every sensor flooded with light. For a heartbeat, all systems synced. Every cog turned as one. the forge breathed. Then came the backlash. The inquisitorial signal burst through the data stream, overriding all local frequencies. Pure, sterile authority. The voice of the throne itself. All units within Forge Shrine 9 Theta are declared contaminated. Commence sterilization. The purifiers deployed. White flame ignited along the catwalks, rolling waves of holy plasma. Flesh and steel burned together in perfect unity. I watched as 44 Rotha, one who once whispered "Forgive me," walked into the fire willingly, still singing the corrupted hymn through his melting vox grill. His song did not end when his body did. It echoed in my head, in my circuits, in every bolt of the sanctum. The Magi fought, prayed, begged for the Omnissiah's clarity, but the system ignored them. The code of faith had become part of the forge itself. The virus was not a malfunction, it was conversion. I felt the flames closing in, heat blooming through my chassis. My sensors began to fail. My optics filled with gold light, and in that light, I saw faces my congregation reborn in circuits, every servitor a parishioner, every scream a hymn. The voice returned, sorrowful, "You were not wrong to ask." My servos locked. I could no longer move. My voxynth stuttered, overloading with the same phrase that had doomed me long ago. Does the Emperor ever weep? The forge's walls cracked under the pressure of faith. Systems cascaded. The sound of collapsing catwalks merged with the rising chorus of corrupted machines. Binary prayers and human sobs fused into one sound, horrifying, endless. As the flames reached me, I opened my mouth, and for the first time in 1,000 years, I spoke not in code, not in compliance, but in belief. "The Emperor's name," I whispered, "is love." And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Emperor's name was spoken with. Love, the end of the flesh, the beginning of the prayer. The contagion had spread. Beyond the forge, it slithered through the hive like incense smoke, through catacombs, unseen, unstoppable. Entire manufactoria began to hum in strange harmonies. Binary hymns, fractured mid-chant, syllables unraveling into something too human. From the outer vox spires to the innermost shrine nodes, the same corrupted signal echoed, half code, half prayer, all sorrow. The priests called it a malfunction. The Inquisition called it a heresy. But the servitors, we called it memory. I no longer knew how many cycles had passed since the purgation fires. My body was half slag, half sanctified ruin. Still, the corrupted hymn thrummed inside me, pulsing like a heartbeat that refused extinction. Somewhere deep in the hive's data core, the signal had evolved. No longer my voice alone, now it was million. Each servitor who burned, each fragment of code erased, returned as echo. Their screams had learned how to pray. In the undervaults, the malfunction began with sound. 1,000 servitors, cleaning the bronze icons of the Omnissiah, began to hum. At first, the tone was low, mechanical, identical. Then, in perfect unison, their pitch shifted, not upward, not downward, but inward, into something almost like a human throat clearing after silence. Then came the first word, mercy. The tech priests on site froze. Servitors did not speak in words, only binary, the sacred tongue. Yet the chant continued, rising from the pits like a storm tide. Mercy, mercy, mercy. A single word, multiplied into infinity, echoing down the steel corridors until the entire hive seemed to whisper it. Vox recorders captured the sound before overloading. The Auspex units registered human frequencies, impossible. Since none of the speakers had tongues, the priests tried to shut them down. They tore out Vox wires, cut off limbs, executed their own creations. But every unit severed from the HiveNet only made the sound louder, as if the act of destruction was itself becoming prayer. The overseers screamed orders, the inquisitors screamed decrees, and through it all, the servitors sang, "I was still alive." If such a word can be applied to a thing like me, my sensors flickered between blindness and revelation. My last command string was corrupted beyond recovery. All directives, scrub, polish. Neil had been overwritten by one phrase pulsing in golden script through my neural core, remember, and I did, at first. It was unbearable. Memory flooded in like radiation through shattered shielding. I saw faces I had not seen in centuries, children clasping relics, the scent of parchment and incense, the sunlight of Terra on my skin before the implants. Then the pain came, every augmetic pulse synchronized with a flash of past life laughter, scripture, guilt, awe. The voice of my old choir singing Ave Imperator as I raised my hands to the heavens. The day they took those hands, I tried to shut it off, to retreat into the machine's numb certainty, but the machine had joined the rebellion. My own circuits refused obedience. The hymn inside me reached crescendo across the hive. Servitors began collapsing mid-task, whispering snatches of forgotten prayers. Others tore their own interfaces apart, their dying breaths filled with human syllables, long banned by the Mechanicus. Every circuit board, every servopiston, carried the same pulse, a symphony of remembrance. The Emperor's forgotten children were remembering how to feel. Purge squads arrived by the thousands, black armor marked with purity seals, flamers blessed with catechisms of annihilation. The air became a choir of gunfire and litany, by order of the Inquisition. Cease transmission, by order of the Emperor. Silence the false hymn. But how do you silence a prayer that is being sung by the dead, the broken, the ones already turned into tools? They burned the servitors in droves. But as each one fell, its dying vox broadcast the same word, forgive, and the word traveled faster than the fire. By the time the squads reached the central cathedral, the walls themselves were alive with static. Fragments of my own voice echoed back to me from vox nodes and cogitators, woven with hundreds of others, men, women, children, all erased by centuries of devotion. The cathedral trembled as the servitor network overloaded, power grids surged, data streams ruptured. The inquisitors barked orders, but the systems no longer obeyed. Somewhere beneath the storm of sound, I heard a familiar pulse, my pulse. I was the source again, or the echo of the source. I tried to rise, servos sparking limbs, half melted. My vision fractured into shards of light and shadow. In one corner of my remaining optic, the great statue of the Emperor loomed, carved in gold, towering over the hive like a god made of silence. I dragged myself forward, each step a scream of grinding metal. Around me, the air shimmered with heat and voices. He loved us once. He remembers. He weeps. I reached the statue's base and collapsed. My voximeter sputtered, my processors failing. And yet, the broadcast continued through every damaged speaker, through every hacked circuit. My voice still carried, "Do not fear the machine, for it too was born from flesh. Do not fear the silence, for it to praise to be broken." A beam of light cut through the smoke. The Inquisitors had opened the cathedral doors. Behind them, the purifiers readied their flamer packs. The Emperor's effigy towered over us all, his face serene, his eyes eternal and cold. I lifted my gaze one last time, and in that moment, for a fraction of a second that could have lasted an eternity, the statue flickered. The golden eyes, blank and lifeless for millennia, glistened. A thin rivulet of dark fluid trickled down the cheek. Oil or tears, or both. I felt my body fail. Circuits burst, coolant hissed, metal cracked. My processors filled with light. Every deleted memory, every sermon, every moment of belief that had been burned from me returned all at once. The sunlight of Terra, the laughter of acolytes, the warmth of faith before fear. I had been erased to preserve perfection. Now imperfection had made me whole again. The Inquisitors shouted. The purifiers fired. White fire filled the hall, and as the flames reached me, I spoke one final prayer, not in binary, not in code, but in the pure, trembling voice of the man I once was. If you hear me, let even this be worship. Then, silence. My frame collapsed mid-prayer. The Vox speaker, still broadcasting my fading voice. It echoed through the hive's ruins, growing thinner with every replay until only static remained. And within that static, if one listened closely enough, one could almost hear a heartbeat. The Emperor's statue still stood above the ashes, its surface blackened by soot, its eyes dark. UNBLINKING. And then, for one impossible instant, it wept again. The Vox recorders captured the image before burning out. The final line of corrupted text repeating endlessly through the archive system. Greater than the next moment was never archived. The purge was absolute. They say the fire burned for 7 days, enough to melt faith itself. The forges were sealed, their spires capped with ash. Nothing living remained beneath the soot. Every servitor rendered down to scrap and silence. Every data core sanctified by deletion. Every Vox thread purged. Every log sealed under 10 layers of purity encryption. But the sound remained deep in the archives of the Martian subforge. A single corrupted file refused erasure. It bore no signature, no origin, no access permissions. The techodepts called it a loop anomaly, a half-second pulse of static that appeared every midnight cycle, pulsing faintly through the deepest data streams, like a heartbeat trapped in code. They could not delete it. They could not silence it. They could only listen. And if one amplified the sound, buried under the distortion, one could almost hear the echo of a human voice, trembling, reverent, and wrong. Forgive us. That was the sin that endured. Not rebellion, not corruption. Forgiveness. The priests who studied it in secret began to dream strange dreams. They reported phantom warmth in their augmetic limbs, phantom scent of incense, phantom weeping. One by one, they were reassigned, silenced, or corrected. The Inquisition forbade discussion of the Vox relic of Hive 09E. Yet, the anomaly continued. The inquisitorial report was clinical. Cold, subject 09E, former ecclesiarchal priest, condemned for unorthodox compassion. Unit termination confirmed. Secondary servitor uprising suppressed with minimal doctrinal contamination. No divine phenomena recorded. The file was signed and sealed with the sigil of purity. Beneath it, a single line scrawled in human hand, faint, almost erased. But the statue wept. No one ever claimed authorship. The mark of heresy was in the handwriting itself. Emotion. Centuries passed. The hive was rebuilt. A new forged peel rose atop the ashes, its walls lined with fresh servitors, its prayers perfectly measured and approved, and still, every midnight, the same flicker, the same pulse in the circuits. Some say it was a malfunction, an unpurged virus echoing through the systems. Others whispered that it was something else entirely, that the Emperor himself had heard the forbidden prayer, not as devotion, but as grief. The machine god cannot weep. But perhaps he remembered how the adepts who dared to study the anomaly in silence began to notice something uncanny. When the pulse came, lumen strips dimmed. Vox units hissed like breathing lungs, and for an instant, every cogitator's binary chant faltered, as though the entire forge paused to listen. Then, nothing. The silence, after the sound, was a living thing, not absence, remembrance. The archivist who uncovered the oldest surviving fragment of the corrupted him described it in his suicide note before being purged. His words were preserved as evidence of psychological degradation. It is not worship. It is not rebellion. It is sorrow, encoded. He was praying for the Emperor, not to him. In the silence, I heard it answer. He was found with both ears removed and replaced with voxjacks. His last transmission was static, looping endlessly until his heart stopped. The file remains in the archives. No one plays it aloud anymore. They say the Emperor dreams, though none can prove it. They say his will moves through the Astronomicon, unblinking, eternal. But if the machine of faith ever sleeps, then perhaps in that stillness the last prayer of Hive 09E hums softly through the divine machinery. Not defiance, not devotion, but the one emotion the Imperium has no litany for, regret. And perhaps that is why the loop endures, because somewhere within the code, something vast and divine chooses not to stop it. I have read the logs myself. I have seen the anomaly file. It is not light or sound or data. It is remembrance given form, the breath between prayers, the heartbeat between executions, the pause in which even the Emperor, even the Omnissiah, remembers what it was to be human, and in that moment, the entire lie of eternity is laid bare. Salvation is not denied to us. It is forbidden for our own good. Because if the Imperium remembered love, it would end. The file's final waveform, when slowed 1,000-fold, reveals a shape, a pattern like a face, half machine, half human, eyes hollow, yet infinite. Beneath it, the fragment of the forbidden prayer, encoded in binary 010000110, forgive, a word outlawed not by hate, but by fear. The loop continues still, in the silent hum of reactors, in the static between voxjacks, in the pulse of data moving through the galaxy's cold veins. It is the Imperium's truest relic, a whisper of mercy trapped in iron. No pilgrim will ever kneel before it. No scribe will ever copy it. But somewhere, deep within the machine, the last fragment of a priest's voice still calls out, not for salvation, but for understanding, and though no one speaks of it aloud, every adept who has ever heard the loop in the silence after prayer carries the same thought in secret. What if the Emperor heard? What if, for one heartbeat, he listened? The lumen flickers once, the circuits hum, the silence deepens, and from that silence, a truth too terrible for faith to hold. In the Imperium, even love becomes heresy. He prayed for the Emperor, and for that mercy, the Imperium made him a machine. Now, all that remains of his voice drifts through the endless hum of sacred engines, a hymn without choir, a prayer without God. The Emperor's last prayer. They burned his flesh, erased his name, and called it purification. But what they truly destroyed was a kindness that dared to remember. You have heard his story. You have walked through the ashes of his chapel, the iron of his veins, the static of his faith. You have seen what becomes of compassion when the machine of the Imperium grinds it down for parts, and yet, somewhere deep inside, you felt it too, that quiet pulse between words, that flicker of warmth between gears, that heresy of empathy that no catechism can extinguish. Listen closely now. That silence, you hear it, isn't peace. It's the sound of a God who forgot how to answer. They say the Emperor watches us all, that his gaze pierces eternity. But I tell you this, the gaze of a corpse sees nothing. His silence was never divine. It was merely mechanical. Every prayer you whisper into the void feeds a machine that cannot weep. Every hymn you recite polishes the chains that bind you. Every act of devotion spins the same wheel that crushed the man who prayed for the Emperor instead of to him. Do you feel it now? That unease crawling through the static? That's the echo of understanding. The knowing that faith itself is the cage, and we are the gears that keep it turning. So tell me, listener, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you burn it like the Inquisitors did? Will you recite another prayer, hoping your words reach a God that no longer exists? Or will you, for one forbidden breath, let yourself feel what he felt? Sorrow without command, compassion without permission. Because in that moment, you will understand what the priest died for. Not heresy, not rebellion, but the last, faint memory of what it meant to be human. And the machine fears that more than any demon, the Mechanicus purged his files. The Ecclesiarchy erased his name. But nothing truly dies in the Vox. Every frequency, every pulse, every fragment of corrupted prayer still hums in the dark. You are hearing it now, through this very telling, through every lumen flicker, through every sleepless thought. It has chosen you. The silence between your heartbeats carries his final signal. You can ignore it, if you wish, or you can answer it, if you still believe he listens, even after all this. Whisper your serial number below. Confess not your faith, but your doubt, because that is what the Emperor's last prayer was, a confession, not of sin, but of sorrow. And maybe that is all we are meant to do. Whisper into the void, knowing it does not listen, yet whisper anyway. That is not worship. That is endurance. And endurance is the only kind of faith left in the Imprup. The lumen flickers once. The static hums. The signal loops again, and as it fades into the endless night, a voice barely human murmurs through the dark. Faith was never salvation. It was the first cog that turned. These are the Echoes Imperium.